March 23, 1945, Reims, France. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. General Dwight D.T. Eisenhower sits at his mahogany desk in a requisition champagne warehouse turned command center. Outside, spring rain taps against the windows. Inside, maps cover every wall, red and blue lines marking Allied positions across Germany, arrows pointing toward Berlin, dotted lines showing supply routes stretching back to Normandy. Eisenhower is reviewing supply requisitions for the Rhine crossing operations, fuel allocations for 1st Army, artillery ammunition for 9th Army, replacement troops for Hodges's divisions. The paperwork of war, endless, necessary, exhausting. The door opens. His chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. Smith's face is unreadable, but he's holding a single sheet of paper, a prisoner of war status report. 3rd Army, dated March 23, 1945. 060 hours. Smith places it on Eisenhower's desk without a word. Eisenhower glances at it. His hand freezes mid-signature on a fuel requisition form. He blinks, reads the number again. His expression goes blank. Not angry, not surprised, just blank. The kind of silence that happens when your brain temporarily stops processing information because what it's seeing doesn't make sense. Bedell, Eisenhower says quietly, this says 50. Yes, sir. 50,000 prisoners. In one night. 18 hours, to be precise, sir. Eisenhower looks up. Check this again. Already did, sir. Twice. 12 Corps reports 28,000. XX Corps reports 22,000 total. 50,127 enemy prisoners of war. Captured between 1800 hours March 22nd and 1200 hours March 23rd. Eisenhower sets down his pen. He pulls over the intelligence summary from 21st Army Group, Field Marshal Montgomery's command in the north. Scans the March statistics. 47,000 prisoners, 8 divisions, 4 weeks of operations. 47,000 total. Patton just exceeded that in 18 hours, with 6 divisions. Bedell, how many POW cages does 3rd Army have operational? 17, sir. As of this morning, they're requesting 12 more. Emergency priority. 12 more? Why? They've run out of barbed wire, sir. Eisenhower stares at him. Run out of barbed wire in one night. Apparently, sir, when you capture 50,000 prisoners, you require approximately 90 miles of barbed wire fencing to contain them in accordance with Geneva Convention standards. 3rd Army used their entire theater allocation before dawn. That's impossible. Smith's expression doesn't change. Apparently not when you're George Patton, sir. Eisenhower stands, walks to the situation map. His finger traces 3rd Army's positions, the Palatinate pocket, the triangle of German-held territory between the Rhine, the Moselle, and the Siegfried Line. 2 weeks ago, intelligence estimated 14 German divisions trapped, battered, undersupplied, but dug in. Shape planning projected 2 weeks to clear the pocket. Methodical advances. Coordinated artillery. Careful reduction of strong points. Patton cleared it in 3 days. Get me 3rd Army headquarters on the line, Eisenhower says. But the prisoner count wasn't even the worst part, because Patton hadn't asked permission for any of it. Before we go further into this story, if you're fascinated by the untold moments of World War II, the decisions, the personalities, the impossible achievements that shaped history, make sure you're subscribed to WW2 Elite. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me which World War II commander you want us to cover next. We bring you the stories the history books gloss over. Now let's get back to March 1945, when Eisenhower realized his most aggressive general had just rewritten the rule book on mobile warfare. March 23, 1945. 1600 hours. The phone line from Chief Headquarters in Reims to 3rd Army Forward HQ in Idar Oberstein, Germany, crackles with static. Eisenhower picks up the receiver. His voice is calm, controlled. The voice of a man who has learned not to show surprise when dealing with George S. Patton. George, I'm looking at a report that says you took 50,000 without requesting additional POW processing units, without coordinating with Army Group logistics. Care to explain? There's a pause. Then Patton's voice comes through, confident, unapologetic. Well, Ike, the Germans kept surrendering. Couldn't very well tell them to come back tomorrow when the paperwork cleared. This isn't a joke, George. Wasn't joking, sir. 12 Corps broke through at Kaiserlautern. XX Corps hit them from the south. They collapsed faster than we expected. By midnight we had entire regiments surrendering without firing a shot. Some of them were marching themselves to the rear because we didn't have enough MPs to... Eisenhower closes his eyes. He can picture it. Patton's armor punching through weak points, infantry following up. German units, exhausted, cut off, surrounded, realizing they had no way out. The Third Army steamroller doing what it does best, moving so fast the enemy can't react. Montgomery spent a month preparing Operation Plunder, Eisenhower says. Massive artillery support, airborne drops, 2 divisions. He's taking the Rhine crossing methodically, by the book, with every resource we can give him. And I crossed it last night, Patton interrupts. Didn't lose a man. Should have that report on your desk by morning. Silence. Complete, total silence on the line. Eisenhower's staff officers in the room freeze. Smith stops mid-step. Everyone is staring at the Supreme Commander, watching his face process what Patton just said. You crossed the Rhine. Eisenhower's voice is very, very quiet. When were you planning to tell me? I'm telling you now, sir. 11th Armored Division, 22:30 hours last night. Assault boats, south of Mainz. Barely any opposition. We're 6 miles deep already. Frankfurt's within reach. George. Eisenhower's hand tightens on the receiver. George, you're going to give me a heart attack. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force allocated resources for Montgomery's crossing. We planned it for weeks. Churchill is watching from an observation post. This was supposed to be the official Allied Rhine crossing. You just decided... Freelance? Ike. Every hour we wait is an hour the Germans use to regroup. I had the bridgehead at Oppenheim. I had the boats. I had the momentum. I took the shot. If I'd waited for authorization, they'd have reinforced the East Bank and we'd have lost men we didn't need to lose. There's logic in that. Eisenhower knows it. Patton is reckless, yes. Insubordinate, absolutely. But he's also right more often than he's wrong. And when Patton is right, he's devastatingly effective. We'll discuss this when you get back to headquarters, Eisenhower says. Until then, try not to capture the entire Wehrmacht without telling anyone. Understood, sir. The line goes dead. Patton has hung up. Eisenhower sets down the receiver, looks at Smith. Bedell, notify Army Group commanders. Third Army has crossed the Rhine. Unauthorized. Successful. No casualties. Montgomery is going to love this. Smith almost smiles. Yes, sir. I'll draft the message carefully. At Third Army headquarters in Idar Oberstein, Patton hangs up the phone and turns to his staff, his operations officer, his intelligence officer, his logistics coordinator, all watching him, waiting. Gentlemen, Patton says, grinning, the Supreme Commander would like us to slow down. His operations officer, Colonel Halley Maddox, raises an eyebrow. Are we slowing down, sir? Patton walks to the map, taps a spot on the main river 30 miles beyond their current positions. Let's be across the Main by midnight. 4th Armored Division leads. I want Frankfurt by tomorrow afternoon. By March 24th, Third Army's prisoner intake has completely overwhelmed the European theater POW system. They're holding 63,000 prisoners in facilities designed for 15,000. Military police battalions are working around the clock, building makeshift compounds using captured German fortification materials. Barbed wire from pillboxes, wooden posts from roadblocks, even sections of the Siegfried Line's Dragon's Teeth barriers repurposed as fence posts. 12 Corps sends an urgent report. German officers are organizing their own men because there aren't enough American guards. Prisoners are forming their own work details, cooking their own food from captured supplies, even posting their own sentries to prevent escapes. It's organized chaos. Functional, but barely. The International Red Cross sends a cable to Chef. Geneva Convention requires adequate shelter, food, and medical care within 24 hours of capture. Current Third Army facilities exceed capacity by 400%. Immediate action required. At Chef Headquarters, General John Lee, the logistics commander responsible for keeping 9 Allied armies supplied, arrives at Eisenhower's office with a stack of reports and a look of barely controlled frustration. Sir, Lee says, spreading charts across Eisenhower's desk, Third Army has consumed 110% of its allocated fuel for March. They've exceeded ammunition allotments by 40%. They're requisitioning rations from First Army depots without authorization. And according to this report, they've captured so many German vehicles that they're using enemy trucks to transport their own supplies. Eisenhower studies the charts, red ink everywhere. Third Army operations, over budget on everything. Is it working? Eisenhower asks. Lee blinks. Sir, is Patton's advance working? Are they achieving objectives? Lee hesitates. They're advancing so fast our supply trucks can't keep up. Patton is capturing German supply depots and using their fuel. He's literally running his army off enemy logistics. Yesterday, XX Corps captured a fuel dump near Darmstadt. Patton ordered it distributed to his tank battalions immediately. Didn't even report it through proper channels. But is it working? Lee looks down at his charts, looks back up. Perfectly, sir. Which is somehow worse. Eisenhower almost smiles. Almost. How much fuel are we saving by Patton's initiative? Preliminary estimates suggest 2.1 million gallons over 2 weeks, sir, plus 3 weeks of transportation capacity. He's essentially making the enemy supply his own defeat. Then let him keep doing it, Eisenhower says, but make sure someone is documenting this. If we ever have to do this again, we need to know how he's pulling it off. But Eisenhower's problems were just beginning. Because on March 26, Patton stopped answering his phone. March 25, 1945, 21st Army Group Headquarters, near Venlo, Netherlands. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, commander of British Second Army, Canadian First Army, and the American Ninth Army, temporarily attached to his command, sits in his caravan reading the morning intelligence summary. Operation Plunder is scheduled to launch tonight. The official Allied crossing of the Rhine. 3 weeks of preparation, 80,000 troops, 3,500 artillery pieces, 2 airborne divisions dropping behind enemy lines. Churchill himself will be watching from an observation post on the West Bank. It will be methodical. By the book. Overwhelming force applied systematically. The British way of Montgomery's intelligence officer hands him a report. 3rd Army Operations Summary, March 2224. Montgomery reads it. His expression doesn't change. He's a master of control, but the people who know him well can see the tightness around his eyes. Patton crossed the Rhine last night in assault boats, at night, with no preliminary bombardment, no massive artillery preparation, just boats and infantry, and he's already 6 miles deep. Montgomery sets down the report, picks up a message form, writes carefully, precisely, to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, from 21st Army Group. Please confirm 3rd Army operations do not interfere with Operation Plunder timeline. Coordinated Allied advance essential for success. Recommend immediate clarification of command boundaries and operational objectives. Montgomery. His Chief of Staff reads it, understands the subtext immediately. Translation, tell Patton to stop showing me up. The message goes out. At Chafe, Smith reads it to Eisenhower. Eisenhower sighs. This is the part of Supreme Command no one talks about, managing egos, balancing personalities, keeping brilliant but difficult men working toward the same goal instead of competing with each other. Draft a response? Eisenhower says, assure Montgomery that Operation Plunder remains the main effort. 3rd Army's crossing is a supporting operation. Emphasize coordination. Even though Patton's already deeper into Germany than the Plunder objectives, especially because of that, Bedell, Monty needs to know his operation matters. And it does. We need crossings all along the Rhine. Not just Patton's mad dash in the south. Smith nods, starts drafting. Eisenhower looks at the map. Patton is approaching Frankfurt. Montgomery is preparing to cross. 1st Army is consolidating at Remagen. 9th Army is supporting Montgomery. The Allied advance is working. It's just not working the way anyone, which Eisenhower is learning, is how things tend to go when George Patton is involved. And then Churchill got involved. March 26, 1945. Prime Minister Winston Churchill arrives at Montgomery's headquarters to personally observe Operation Plunder. He's brought photographers, war correspondents, members of Parliament. This is supposed to be the British Empire's triumphant crossing of the last major barrier to Berlin, a historic moment. Churchill is briefed on the operation, shown the maps, told about the artillery plan, the airborne. It's impressive, overwhelming. Everything a set-piece operation should be. Then someone mentions that the 3rd Army, 2 days ago, with assault boats. Churchill's expression is unreadable. He turns to Montgomery. Is this true? Yes, Prime Minister. General Patton conducted an unauthorized crossing south of Mainz on the evening of March 22nd. Unauthorized? He did not coordinate with Supreme Headquarters or neighboring armies before executing the operation. Churchill processes this and his current position. Montgomery's intelligence officer points to the map. They've advanced 45 miles beyond the Rhine as of this morning, Prime Minister. They're approaching Frankfurt. Churchill stares at the map. Then he does something no one expects. He smiles. A big, genuine Winston Churchill smile. "Gentlemen," Churchill says, "it appears the Americans have stolen a march on us. How very enterprising of General Patton." He turns to Montgomery. "Bernard, I suggest we ensure that Operation Plunder is executed with such overwhelming success that no one remembers who crossed first. They may have crossed in boats. We shall cross with the entire weight of the British Empire behind us. It's a diplomatic masterpiece, acknowledging Patton's achievement while reframing plunder as the more significant operation. Churchill understands what Eisenhower understands. This isn't a competition. It's a war. And right now the Allies are winning. But that doesn't stop Montgomery from sending another message to Sheff, requesting clarification on whether Third Army's advance might be moving a bit too fast for proper coordination with neighboring forces. Eisenhower reads it, hands it to Smith. "Bedell, what's the diplomatic way to say, 'let Patton run'?" Smith considers. "I'll think of something, sir." What happened next would force Eisenhower to say words he never thought he'd say about George Patton. March 27, 1945. Sheff Operations Room. The situation map is updated every 6 hours with latest unit positions. This morning, the staff officers updating Third Army's markers run into a problem. "Sir," a young lieutenant says to the duty officer, "I can't confirm these positions. According to this morning's report, 4th Armored Division is at Frankfurt. But yesterday they were 30 miles west. That's impossible in 24 hours with opposition." The duty officer checks the radio logs, reads the position reports, checks them against yesterday's map. The lieutenant is right. 4th Armored Division has moved 30 miles overnight. 12 Corps is at Wiesbaden. XS Corps has taken Darmstadt. Third Army is advancing faster than the map can track. Update the markers, the duty officer says, and note estimated positions, not confirmed. We'll clarify when the next report comes in. By the time the next report comes in, the positions have changed again. Sheff operations staff start updating Third Army's position every 4 hours instead of 6. Then every 2 hours. They still can't keep up. By the time they mark where Third Army is, Patton's units have already moved beyond it. It's unprecedented. German resistance is collapsing. Entire regiments are surrendering, not because they're being defeated in battle, because by the time they receive orders to establish a defensive line, American tanks are already behind them. At 21st Army Group Headquarters, Montgomery's British liaison officer with Third Army sends a report. Today is March 28th. They're 13 days ahead of schedule. Montgomery reads it, says nothing. Returns to planning Operation Plunder's follow-up operations. If Patton is going to ignore the schedule, Montgomery will ensure British forces execute their operations flawlessly. At Third Army headquarters, Patton is studying maps when his intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, brings in the latest prisoner count. "Sir, as of 1200 hours today, total prisoners captured since March 22nd, 90 to 1,000. 91,000? Yes, sir. 12 Corps, 40 to 1,000. XX Corps, 33,000. 8 Corps, 17,000. We've captured more prisoners in 6 days than, well, sir, than anyone." Patton grins. "Oscar, send a message to General Brad. Tell him if he can get me enough gasoline, I'll have Third Army in Berlin in 48 hours. Koch hesitates. "Sir, should we clear that with Sheff first?" "Send the message, Oscar." The message goes to 12th Army Group Headquarters. General Omar Bradley, Patton's immediate superior and old friend, shakes his head, picks up the phone, calls Eisenhower. "Ike, I've given up trying to control George. I just call him every morning to find out where he is. Yesterday, he was supposed to be securing bridgeheads. Today, he's about to cut off Army Group B's entire retreat route. Tomorrow, he'll probably be in Bavaria." Eisenhower, on the other end of the line, is silent for a moment. Then, "Brad, is he achieving objectives?" "He's achieving objectives that won't be assigned for another 2 weeks. Then let him run. But make sure someone is keeping track of what he's doing, because if this works, we're going to need to study it. And if it doesn't work, Bradley hangs up, looks at his chief of staff. "Make sure Third Army has priority on fuel shipments and start drafting after-action reports. Detailed ones, because nobody is going to believe this when the war is over." Meanwhile, on the German side, the view is very different and very alarming. General Hermann Bulk commands Army Group G, the German forces facing Patton in southern Germany. He's a veteran of the Eastern Front. He's fought the Soviets. He knows what fast, aggressive armored warfare looks like. But on March 28th, Balk tries to establish a defensive line along the main river. He issues orders to 3 divisions: hold the river crossings, deny the Americans bridgeheads, buy time for Army Group B to withdraw from the Ruhr. By the time the orders reach his forward units, American tanks are already across the Main. The defensive line Balk tried to create never existed. After the war, in Allied interrogation, Balk will say, "We could not understand Patton's speed. Our doctrine called for consolidation. After river crossings, rest, resupply, bring up artillery, prepare for the next phase." Patton simply never stopped. By the time we received orders to establish a defense line, his tanks were already behind it. It was like fighting a forest fire. Everywhere we tried to contain it, it had already spread beyond our positions. Another German officer interviewed after the war will put it more simply: Patton didn't fight us. He overran us. There's a difference. Even the Soviet liaison officer at Chef takes notice. On March 28th, he sends a report to Moscow. American General Patton advancing at rates comparable to 1944 Soviet operations during Bagration Offensive, capturing German forces before they can establish defensive positions, recommends study of American mobile warfare techniques for future operations. The Red Army, which pioneered deep battle doctrine, which perfected operational maneuver, is impressed by Patton's speed. That's how fast Third Army is moving. By March 28th, Third Army has advanced 80 to 7 miles beyond the Rhine in 5 days. They've captured 93,000 prisoners, they've destroyed or captured 1,400 German vehicles, and they're threatening to encircle the entire German Army Group B in the Ruhr. An operation Schaeff planning estimated would take 6 weeks. Patton did the preliminary work in less than 1 week. At his forward headquarters, Patton looks at the map, traces the routes to Berlin, to Prague, to Munich, turns to his staff. "Gentlemen, we have the Germans on the... Every hour we maintain momentum is an hour they can't regroup. I don't care if we're ahead of schedule. I don't care if logistics is screaming. We keep moving until they tell us to stop, and maybe not even then." Someone asks about casualties. Patton's answer is immediate. "We're taking fewer casualties moving fast than we would moving slow. Speed is armor. Speed is firepower. Speed wins wars." He's right. Third Army's casualties during the March offensive are remarkably low, less than half what Chef projected for operations of this scale. Because they're moving so fast, German forces don't have time to organize effective resistance. Units surrender rather than fight. Strong points are bypassed rather than... Patton has figured out that in mobile warfare, speed itself is a weapon. But back at Chef, the question everyone is asking is simple: how much longer can he keep this up? March 29, 1945, General Dwight D. Eisenhower decides he needs to see this for himself. He boards his personal C-47 transport and flies to Frankfurt, which Patton captured that morning. The airfield is still being cleared of destroyed German aircraft when Eisenhower's plane lands. Patton is waiting at the runway, fresh uniform, polished boots, that trademark ivory-handled revolver on his hip. He's grinning. Eisenhower steps off the plane, looks around at the captured German airfield, the city of Frankfurt in the distance, the smoke from recent fighting still visible on the horizon. "George," Eisenhower says, "do you have any idea how many regulations you violated in the past week?" Patton snaps a salute. "No, sir. I've been too busy winning the war." They walk to Patton's command vehicle, a captured German staff car that Third Army appropriated somewhere along the march. Inside, maps are spread across every surface. Situation reports, intelligence summaries, logistics updates. The organized chaos of a headquarters that's moving too fast to stay in one place. "You exceeded your fuel allocation," Eisenhower says, studying the maps. "You captured more prisoners than our system can process. You crossed the Rhine without authorization. You've advanced so far ahead of First Army that you've got exposed flanks for 60 miles. Patton pulls out a larger map, spreads it on the hood of the car. "Ike, look at this. We've cut off the German 7th Army's retreat right here. 12 Corps and XX Corps are closing the gap. In 2 days, maybe less, we'll close the Ruhr pocket. That's 300,000 German soldiers out of the war, maybe more. They can't retreat. They can't resupply. They're done." Eisenhower studies the map. Patton's right. Third Army's advance has created an opportunity that Chef planning didn't anticipate for another month. The Ruhr encirclement, the largest industrial region in Germany, defended by some of the Wehrmacht's best remaining units, is about to be sealed off, not through careful methodical operations but through sheer speed. And Montgomery? Eisenhower asks. Patton doesn't hesitate. Monty's doing fine. He's got the north, I've got the center. Between us, we're ending this war. His way works, my way works. They're different ways, but they both work. It's the most diplomatic thing Eisenhower, and it's true. Montgomery's methodical, overwhelming approach and Patton's fast, aggressive approach are both succeeding. The Germans can't defend against both simultaneously. Eisenhower looks at the map showing 93,000 prisoners, the Rhine bridgehead, the advance toward the Ruhr, the captured cities, the shattered German divisions. He looks at Patton, exhausted, exhilarated, already planning the next phase. George, Eisenhower says quietly, you're either going to win this war 6 months early or get us all court-martialed. Patton grins. I'll take those odds, sir. Eisenhower almost smiles. Almost. 50,000 prisoners in one night, more than an entire army group captured in a month. You know what this means? Patton's grin widens. That Third Army gets first pick of the German beer stocks when we reach Bavaria? Eisenhower shakes his head. He's frustrated. He's impressed. He's exasperated. He's watching a man who operates by rules that don't exist in any doctrine, who achieves results that shouldn't be possible, who makes the impossible look routine. And that's when Eisenhower says it. The words that will define Patton's, the words that acknowledge what everyone already knows but hasn't quite articulated. Eisenhower looks at George Patton, at the map showing impossible achievements, at the general who keeps breaking every rule and keeps succeeding anyway, and says, "It means, George, that you're the only man I know who can make the impossible routine." Silence. Patton stops grinning. For just a moment, he's serious, because he understands what Eisenhower just said. This wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a reprimand. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition of a fundamental truth about Patton that everyone had observed, but no one had quite put into words. Other commanders planned for what was possible. They calculated logistics, assessed enemy strength, estimated timelines, prepared for contingencies. They operated within the realm of the achievable. Patton operated in a different realm entirely. He didn't break rules out of recklessness. He transcended them because his operational tempo existed on a different plane. He understood something about modern warfare that doctrine hadn't caught up to yet. Momentum is its own force multiplier. When you move faster than the enemy can react, when you never give them time to consolidate, when you turn their own expectations against them, then the impossible becomes inevitable. The 50,000 prisoners weren't an anomaly. They were proof. Proof that Patton had figured out how to weaponize speed. German units didn't surrender because they were defeated in battle. They surrendered because by the time they received orders to defend a position, American tanks were already behind them. They surrendered because resistance was futile, when the enemy was everywhere at once. Eisenhower understood this now. Patton's chaos wasn't chaos at all. It was a highly sophisticated form of warfare that violated every principle of methodical advance, but achieved in days what orthodox tactics would take weeks to accomplish. "Thank you, sir," Patton says quietly. Then the grin returns. "Now, about that gasoline allocation." Eisenhower laughs. "Get back to work, George, and try to leave some Germans for the rest of us to capture." The Palatinate-Rhein campaign, March 13th to March 28th, 1945, resulted in Third Army capturing 113,000 German prisoners total, more than the entire British 21 Army Group's 87,000 for the same period, despite having fewer divisions. By April 1st, Third Army had advanced 120 miles beyond the Rhine. The Ruhr pocket was closed on April 4th, trapping 317,000 German soldiers, the largest encirclement of German forces in the Western Theater. Third Army did the preliminary work in less than a week. The statistics are staggering when you lay them out. Patton's Rhine crossing at Oppenheim, 16 assault boats, executed at night, 0 casualties, no preliminary bombardment. Montgomery's Rhine crossing at Wessel, Operation Plunder, 80,000 troops, 3,500 artillery pieces, 2 airborne divisions launched 24 hours after Patton's crossing, 3,968 casualties. Both crossings succeeded, both were necessary. But the contrast is striking. Chef Logistics eventually calculated that Patton's use of captured German supplies, fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles, vehicle parks, saved the Allied supply chain approximately 2.01 million gallons of fuel and 3 weeks of transportation capacity. He literally made the enemy's supply his own defeat. But the numbers only tell part of the story. The real story is what Patton understood that made staff officers nervous and enemies terrified. In warfare, speed isn't just a tactical advantage. It's every hour the Third Army kept moving was an hour the German command couldn't reorganize, couldn't establish defense lines, couldn't execute an orderly retreat, couldn't bring up reserves, couldn't coordinate with neighboring units. The 50,000 prisoners captured in one night weren't captured because Third Army was stronger, they were captured because Third Army was faster. Speed created a cascade. German units lost contact with higher headquarters. Orders became outdated before they could be executed. Defensive plans collapsed because by the time positions were prepared, the enemy was already past them. Patton weaponized momentum, and once he had it, he never let it go. Eisenhower's genius, and it was genius, was recognizing that Patton's apparent chaos was actually a sophisticated form of warfare that doctrine hadn't caught up to yet. While it violated every principle of methodical advance, it achieved results that conventional operations couldn't match. From Eisenhower's memoir, Crusade in Europe, published in 1948, Patton's operations during the Rhine crossing period demonstrated that calculated audacity, when backed by competent staff work and aggressive leadership, can compress timelines that conventional planning deems impossible. I spent half my time reining him in and the other half wondering why I bothered. That last sentence captures the essential truth of the Eisenhower-Patton relationship. Eisenhower knew Patton was difficult, knew he was insubordinate, knew he created logistical nightmares and diplomatic headaches. But Eisenhower also knew that when you pointed Patton at the enemy and told him to attack, impossible things happened. When General George C. Marshall Army Chief of Staff, the man who built the American war machine, reviewed the European campaign statistics in June 1945, he noted something remarkable. Third Army's prisoner capture rate in March 1945 exceeded the entire United States Army's capture rate during the final German offensive in World War I. One army, 1 month. 113,000 prisoners. Marshall's handwritten note on the report, now preserved in the National Archives, recommend study of Third Army operations as basis for future mobile warfare doctrine. Also recommend keeping Patton away from supply officers. Even Marshall, serious, methodical, by-the-book George Marshall, recognized that Patton had discovered something worth studying, something that transcended conventional military wisdom. The man who captured 50,000 Germans overnight ended World War II having taken 956,000 prisoners total, more than any other Allied army. American, British, Canadian, French, none matched Patton's total. And he did it while perpetually running out of gas, perpetually exceeding his logistics allocation, perpetually operating ahead of schedule. Third Army's final statistics: 531 days of combat operations, 1,300,000 miles traveled, 12,000 cities and towns liberated or captured, 956,000 prisoners taken. Approximately 400,000 enemy casualties inflicted, Third Army's own casualties, 130 to 7,000 total, of which 21,000 were killed in action. For context, that's a prisoner capture rate of 7 to 1. For every American casualty, Third Army captured 7 German soldiers and removed them from the war. That ratio is almost unheard of in military history. After the war, military historians studied Third Army operations, trying to understand how Patton achieved what he achieved. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College dedicated an entire course to analyzing the March 1945 offensive. The conclusion was both simple and profound. Patton understood that in mobile warfare, the enemy's decision-making cycle is a vulnerability. If you can move faster than the enemy can observe, orient, decide, and act, if you can complete multiple operations before the enemy finishes reacting to the first one, then you create paralysis. They're defeated through disorientation. German General Hermann Balck, after the war, in extensive interviews with American military historians, Patton's operations were not simply fast, they were incomprehensible. We could not predict where he would strike next because he didn't follow predictable patterns. He attacked where we were weak, bypassed where we were strong, and never paused long enough for us to reorganize. It was like fighting smoke, everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. That might be the best description of Patton's operational method ever recorded. Fighting smoke. everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The Soviet Union studied Patton's operations extensively. Soviet deep battle doctrine, developed in the 1930s, perfected during the Great Patriotic War, emphasized similar principles of speed and momentum. Soviet military theorists recognized in Patton a kindred spirit, someone who understood operational art at the highest level. In Soviet military academies after the war, Patton's March 1945 offensive was taught alongside Soviet operations as an example of how to conduct deep penetration operations in the enemy rear. The irony is that Patton never studied Soviet doctrine. He didn't need to. He understood intuitively what Soviet theorists had developed systematically. Great military minds, it seems, converge on similar truths regardless of doctrine or nation. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Patton's achievement comes from an unexpected source. In 1947, during the Nuremberg trials, German Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Wehrmacht High Command, was asked which Allied general the Germans feared most. His answer: Patton. We always knew where Montgomery was going. We could predict Eisenhower's decisions. Bradley was methodical. But Patton? We never knew where he would strike next, and once he started moving, we couldn't stop him. The man the Germans feared most. The general who captured 50,000 prisoners in one night. The commander who made the impossible routine. George S. Patton died in December 1945, killed in a car accident in Germany. He never returned home to the hero's welcome he deserved, never saw his grandchildren, but his legacy lived on, in doctrine, in military theory, in the understanding that speed, momentum, and audacity can achieve what firepower and numbers alone cannot. Eisenhower, in private letters after Patton's death, wrote, "George was the most brilliant combat commander I ever knew. Also the most difficult. I would not have won the war without him. I probably couldn't have survived peacetime with him. He was a warrior in the truest sense, uncomfortable in any world but war, transcendent in combat." That might be the truest epitaph for Patton. A warrior in the truest sense, transcendent in combat. The Third Army that Patton built, the techniques he pioneered, the operational tempo he established, all of it became foundational to American armored doctrine. The 1949 Field Manual on Armored Operations included sections directly based on Third Army's 1945 campaigns. The U.S. Army's airland battle doctrine of the 1980s echoed Patton's emphasis on speed and deep penetration. Even modern maneuver warfare theory owes a debt to what Patton proved possible in 1945. He captured 50,000 Germans overnight, not through superior firepower, not through overwhelming numbers, through speed, through momentum. Through understanding that in warfare, the enemy's mind is the ultimate battlefield. Confuse them, disorient them, move faster than they can think, and they'll defeat themselves. That was Patton's genius. And that's why Eisenhower said what he said on March 29, 1945, standing in a captured German city, looking at maps showing impossible achievements. "You're the only man I know who can make the impossible routine." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an insult. It was simply the truth. And if you've made it this far in this story, I want to thank you for watching WW2 Elite. This is the kind of deep dive into history we do here. Not just the famous battles, but the personalities, the decisions, the moments that changed everything. If you want more stories like this, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell, leave a comment telling me which World War II story you want to hear next, and share this video with anyone who loves military history. These stories deserve to be remembered. These men deserve to be honored. And the lessons they taught us deserve to be learned. Thank you for watching, and remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why it happened and what it means for us today.